Hello, what is up? Today we are talking about bench press and specifically we're going to be talking about how to best set up to maximize your arch in your bench press. Now in this video we're not going to be talking about whether or not arching is safe or dangerous. We're not going to be talking about whether or not it's cheating or if it's good for maximizing hypertrophy, anything like that. We're simply talking about how to actually maximize your arch, assuming that is your goal. Now firstly, I want to preface this video with a couple of things. The first is that this video's instructions are based around a lifter who competes in the IPF or its affiliates. So if you lift in a different federation, there'll be different rules, and some of the things that I talk about might not be applicable to you. Now the second thing that I want to preface this video with is the fact that the bench press, unlike the squat and deadlift, has a really high degree of variation between techniques, between lifters at a high level. What that means though is that the technique that I share with you in this video isn't necessarily the best technique, and it's not one that is commonly seen amongst all lifters, or it's not the common denominator amongst top lifters. It's simply one way to go about setting up your arch, and what you'll find amongst a lot of the best lifters is that there's a very high degree of variation in the technique that they use. So feel free to try this style, and that's the best way to think about bench press technique, is they come in different styles. So feel free to try this style, and if it helps you, then great, and if it doesn't, you might have to find something that's more individualized for you. In order to make this video easy to follow, I'm going to split up the instructions into 3 steps. That is, there's going to be 3 major points to consider in order to maximize your bench press arch. Now the first is about leg drive, and I'm going to call this quad drive. There happens to be a little bit of a misconception in the bench press that you need to squeeze your glutes in your setup. And this is actually something that I don't teach my lifters. Rather, I try to teach them to relax their glutes and instead use your quads. When you're setting up on the bench press, your leg drive is something that should be pushing you up the bench. It's not something that pushes you up this way, it pushes you along the bench. So the way you should think about it is that your upper back should stick to the bench and your hips will be over here. And if you can use your legs to push your hips towards your shoulders essentially, that piece in the middle ends up folding, and it folds up into a big arch. So you want to push these things together, kind of like if you've got a flimsy piece of plywood or something. You push these 2 pieces together and your bridge, your arch ends up increasing. So it's really important that your leg drive pushes away from the bench and pushes your hips and torso up the bench. Now of course your upper body shouldn't slide on the bench because you should have chalk on your back. You've got weight in your hands. So you shouldn't actually slide off the bench, and your hips should be moving towards your back, folding yourself up. Now, like I said, you don't want to be squeezing your glutes. You actually want to be relaxed through your glutes. Squeezing of your glutes won't push you up the bench, and it doesn't help your arch in any way. All it simply does is it extends your hip. And hip extension ends up picking your hips up off the bench, kind of like a glute bridge would pick your hips up off the floor when you're doing hip thrusters. It's the same idea. Squeezing glutes would actually pick your hips up, which would be illegal in powerlifting competition. So you want to be relaxed through your glutes. The second reason that you actually want to be relaxed through your glutes is that your glutes are not only a hip extensor, but in a closed kinetic chain, they're actually a lumbar flexor. And for an arch, for an effective arch, we want lumbar extension as well as thoracic extension. So having squeezed glutes will end up flattening your back out, which is not what we want. Again, another reason to have relatively relaxed glutes. So the key for the first point is use your quads to push yourself up the bench and relax your glutes. Now in terms of where you place your feet should actually be pointing forward. And the reason that I teach my lifters to point their feet forward is that this is the best position to have your feet so that your quads are able to extend your knee and push yourself up the bench. Now you can imagine if you had your feet turned out too much, knee extension or firing through your quads would only push your feet into each other. They'd only push sideways. There'd be too much lateral force. What we want is to actually internally rotate our hip so that our feet are relatively forward, and now we're in a position to actually use our quads to push ourselves up the bench. Now of course some lifters might not have the mobility to kind of get in this position because it is quite demanding at the hip to internally rotate your hip and take a relatively wide stance, but it's something that you can work on. So you might have to end up narrowing your stance slightly, but the key here is to really have your feet pointing forward and using your legs to push yourself up the bench, not lifting your torso or your hips up off the bench. Okay, the second point that we're going to talk about when it comes to setting up to improve your arch is about using your lats. And this is a bit of a different one, and this is something that you should think about when you're setting up. And I've actually made a video in the past about setting up for shoulder depression, where I kind of talk about this slightly in a different context. What you want to do is you want to use your lats to lever your body up the bench to get your torso, to get your chest essentially vertical, because you want your chest to be like nice and high. So what this is going to look like is that when you're grabbing the bench and you're laying on the bench and you're grabbing the bar, you want to use your lats to pull the bar down. And what's going to end up happening is the bar is going to come towards the end of the lip on the bench, on the rack. And once the bar becomes motionless, the only thing that can move is your torso. Your chest ends up rising. So using your lats in your setup is really important. One of the cues that I often give my lifters is quads and lats in the setup. The quads relates to the point that I made prior, and obviously the lats is what I'm talking about here. Those two things kind of happen at the same time. Your quads push yourself up the bench, while your lats pull yourself up the bench. Those things happening at the same time, remember your back should be relatively stuck to the bench, shouldn't be moving very much, will help fold your chest up and push your chest and torso high. Okay, the third point is a little bit more abstract. I don't think I've ever heard anyone speak about this, but it's to flatten your neck. Now, if you think about it, when you're laying on the bench, assuming that your head's lying on the bench, you'll have a normal arch through your neck, and then your torso will end up picking up like this. Right? And if this is your head flat, your torso ends up picking up like this. So you actually need a certain amount of cervical flexion to get into that position. What we end up doing is if we can flatten your neck against the bench, it decreases the demand in this position, meaning your chest can actually go higher. So a good way to think about it is, well, obviously flattening your neck against the bench. And the second way to think about it is tucking your chin. So it ends up looking like this, where instead of having this forward head poke, you really tuck your chin back and your head flattens against the bench. The key with all of these points is that you should try to be doing them all together at the same time. So it's one synchronized action. It ends up looking as one smooth movement. You're lying on the bench, you flatten your neck against the bench, at the same time your quads are pushing yourself up the bench and your chest is rising high. All three of these things happen at the same time. Okay, so I hope these 3 points were helpful for you. Give them a go in the gym, like I said. This is a specific style. There are hundreds and hundreds of different ways to take on your sit-up and take on your bench press arch. These are some of the things that I think about. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and I've tried many different things in the past that have also worked really, really well. But try these 3 things and let me know how you go. If you've got any questions about bench pressing or bench press arch, let me know. I might make another video on those topics. You can leave those comments in the section below and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, and I will get back to you next week with a video with another guest presenter. Thanks. That was so much harder than it should have been. By saying, firstly, this instructional video is... Okay, so in order to make this video easy to follow, I'm going to split up the instructions into... If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Hi everyone, my name's Jean-Paul and I just filmed a video on bench pressing and I don't know how to bench press, so I hope you enjoy my video on how to bench, but I can't bench, so